Key Ukrainian advisor says new $5 billion IMF loan could reassure different lenders. Kyiv securing a brand new $5 billion mortgage from the IMF could assist reassure Ukraine's other creditors that the war-torn USA's macroeconomic situation changed into beneath manipulate, President Volodymyr Zelensky's leader economic advisor advised on Friday. Fresh financing from the International Monetary Fund for around 18 months may want to serve as the anchor for a larger package deal of $15 billion $20 billion to help Ukraine climb the economic disaster due to Russia's invasion, the advisor, Oleg Ustenko, mentioned. He stated Ukrainian officials have been in touch with the worldwide lender about the capability request, adding that the goal need to be to transport forward as fast as feasible. The IMF declined to comment. Ustenko's comments came simply over weeks after Ukraine's critical financial institution governor, Kyrylo Shevchenko, told that he turned into seeking as plenty as $20 billion from the IMF over 3 years, an amount that might have positioned Ukraine nicely over the fund's terrific get entry to restriction for lending. The large size of that request had caused extreme debate in the IMF because it might have additionally raised questions on the sustainability of Ukraine's debt. The revised plan might be modeled on a financing package agreed in 2015, after Russia's invasion of the Crimea region of Ukraine, that protected $17.5 billion in IMF funding, however helped leverage general investment of $40 billion. An IMF program of $5 billion could be in step within advance investment tiers and is probably a catalyst for funding from other resources, inclusive of the EU, the US Treasury and different man or woman countries, Ustenko informed. Ukraine's previous $5 billion loan software was cancelled in March as the IMF approved $1.4 billion in emergency financing with few conditions within the early weeks of Russia's invasion. Ukrainian authorities pledged to work with the fund to design a new economic software aimed toward rehabilitation and boom, while conditions allow. Ukraine, grappling with the internal displacement of some 7 million humans by means of Russia's invasion on February 24, is scrambling to marshal assets to cope with strength shortages, rising inflation, and a worsening humanitarian disaster as wintry weather techniques. It faces a 45% monetary contraction in 2022 and a month-to-month monetary shortfall of $5 billion, with solely a third of a few $29 billion in Western resource pledges having materialized up to now, economists say. This week, Ukraine's Foreign Places creditors backed its request for a 2-year freeze on bills on almost $20 billion in worldwide bonds. However, Ukraine must nevertheless make $635 million in fundamental payments on previous IMF loans starting in mid-September. Ustenko stated Ukraine hoped to transport ahead quick with negotiations with the IMF with an eye fixed to reaching an initial agreement earlier than the ones payments have been due. Risks. Precedents. Proponents of the brand new program argue that Ukraine had made correct progress on tackling deficits and addressing corruption before the war, and the new lending might permit it to stabilize the economy. But critics say a huge new mortgage may want to place the fund at hazard, as Russia ought to still win the war and refuse to make good on Ukraine's money owed. Mark Sobel, U.S. chair of the OMFIF economic coverage think tank and a former senior Treasury reputable, said the fund was set up to be a first responder to excessive systemic global financial crises, and it must act to assist Ukraine pay pensions and different obligations. Martin Muleisen, a former IMF strategy chief now affiliated with the Atlantic Council, stated even a loan of $5 billion would boost debt sustainability questions inside the midst of a conflict and set worrisome precedents, moving it sincerely to Western priorities. The IMF changed into utilized by the US and its allies for strategic functions all through the Cold War. Tying the fund towards the West's political objectives may also once more be called for, but it at war with the IMF's aspiration to be a truly international corporation, Muleisen mentioned.